This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.
Welcome to the City of God podcast, where we are tackling today's most pressing cultural issues through the lens of God's infallible word. I'm Pastor Rob Pacienza. And on today's episode, I'm joined by my good friend, Allie Beth Stuckey. You may know Allie from her hit podcast, Relatable, where she speaks boldly on everything from theology to politics with biblical conviction and cultural clarity. She joined us at our Kingdom Come conference this past spring to address what she calls toxic empathy, a dangerous distortion of compassion that's running rampant in our culture. It's the kind of empathy that refuses to speak truth for fear of offending, and in doing so, ends up causing more harm than good. Whether it's gender ideology or the current immigration debate, many Christians are being swept into emotional narratives that sound kind on the surface, but ultimately reject God's design for justice, order, and truth. This is a challenging and timely conversation you'll not want to miss. Most people think of empathy as a virtue, but what is toxic empathy?
Yeah, so I would argue that empathy is really neither good nor bad in itself, that it's not in itself a virtue. So empathy actually means to be in someone's feelings, whereas compassion literally means with suffering. Kindness and love and sympathy have their own definitions, but to empathize with someone literally means to put yourself in their place and to feel what they feel. And what I argue, and what people much smarter than me, like Yale psychologists, have argued, is that empathy is powerful either way, but it can be powerful in a positive or a negative direction. So for example, I open up my book, Toxic Empathy, with a positive example, and many of us have had these situations in our lives. I saw a woman struggling in the airport. She was traveling with her toddler. She was trying to lug her suitcase and her stroller, and I knew exactly how she felt in that moment because I had been there. And therefore, I knew exactly what she needed. She didn't need my help. She needed me to insist upon helping her, help her carry her bags to her seat because I happened to be traveling alone. In that moment, that kind of empathy, me being able to feel how she feels, motivated me toward kindness and doing something that I knew needed to be done. But feeling how someone feels can also push you in the direction of affirming lies, validating sin, or supporting destructive policies. Because feelings are not necessarily indicative of truth, and we can get into the specific examples of that, and that's what I do in my book. But feelings can actually lead us in a really bad direction.
Yeah, so let's talk about your new book. What led you to write it, and why is it so important for what's happening in evangelicalism right now?
Yes, it's called Toxic Empathy, How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion. And that subtitle is important because I think if people read Toxic Empathy alone, they might think that I'm saying all forms of empathy are toxic. You should never feel how someone feels. You should never put yourself in someone's position. That's not what it is. It is about bad actors exploiting Christians' good instinct to care for people, especially vulnerable people, and using that to emotionally manipulate us into supporting progressive policies. So, for example, I have my first chapter is about abortion. We talk about abortion, immigration, social justice, gender, sexuality, all of these things. And we hear that abortion is healthcare. And typically how that message is conveyed to us is not just by saying, well, here's what the abortion procedure is and it's good. No, we are told a very sad story of a poor woman who needed an abortion, who was in a destitute situation, and a pro-life law cruelly forced her to give birth to this baby that she couldn't care for. Pull on our heartstrings, punch us in the gut, make us feel that the more empathetic and compassionate position is to be for abortion. The problem is that form of empathy ignores the person on the other side of the moral equation, the real victim in every abortion, and that is the baby. Toxic empathy blinds us to reality and morality.
I think it's important for our audience to understand, we're not just talking about the progressive left being complicit. We're also talking about major evangelical outlets being complicit in leveraging empathy for progressive causes. Elaborate on that.
Oh, yeah. So in every segment of these chapters, I dedicate a portion to talking about how this idea has actually infiltrated what we might call conservative Christianity. I typically refer to this group as the mushy middle, the people who might say they're apolitical, they're outside of politics, but they always tend strangely to veer to the left or veer into the secular when it comes to things like abortion. So typically what you'll hear, they will say, those who call themselves maybe conservative Christians, but they think abortion isn't black and white. It's a very nuanced issue is what they'll say. And they'll say, well, I'm pro all life, or I'm holistically pro-life. And what they mean by that really is that they are against the death penalty, they're against the enforcement of immigration law, and they're for legal abortion. And they will say that that means that they're really just trying to care for the most vulnerable in a variety of ways, and they don't believe that we should have any laws on the books that punish, giving the abortion procedure. But really, what it comes down to is that they don't believe those babies inside the womb have the same rights and dignity that you and I do. But they use very clever, empathy-laden language to convince Christians that the more loving position is to essentially vote Democrat, but really be on the progressive side of any issue.
Would it be fair to say we saw this in 2020 with Black Lives Matters, with the rise of critical race theory being exposed in our public school system?
Oh yeah, that's huge. And that's maybe the most controversial chapter in my book. The last chapter is about social justice. And I talk about this in the chapter that this was the inspiration for this book, is the conversations that I had with trusted faith leaders who would call themselves conservative evangelicals, who were posting the black square that was trendy at the time, raising their fists saying Black Lives Matter, echoing mantras like riots are the voice of the unheard, condemning things like white privilege, saying America is systemically racist. These are not, as you said, these far left progressive preachers. These are people who would have called themselves conservative evangelicals. And I had a lot of in-person conversations with them because they were frustrated with me because I was saying, no, social justice and justice aren't the same things. And a lot of what you're saying is not even factually true, not to mention not biblically true. And what I heard from one particular leader was sometimes it doesn't matter what is true, we just have to have empathy. And that's when it clicked for me, that some people are willing, for the sake of not wanting to ruffle feathers because they want to be liked, they want, 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in Christianity, they want to suspend judgment, to suspend wisdom, to simply affirm how someone feels because that is the easier thing to do, and they want to call it love, but it's not. If my child comes to me in the middle of the night and says, Mom, I've got a monster in the corner of my room, yes, I can say, wow, that's really scary, but the most loving thing for me to do is not to say, yeah, that's a monster because you feel that way, go back to bed. The most loving thing to do is for me to go into her room and turn the light on and show her what the reality is. And my driving argument in the book is that empathy and love are not synonymous. Empathy can lead you to love, but if empathy leads you to lies, it's no longer love. Because love, as defined by the God who is love, 1 John 4:8, he gets to define it. It has many qualities, as we read in 1 Corinthians 13, but in 1 Corinthians 13:6, we read that love never rejoices in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. So love is not just feeling how someone feels. Love, according to the Bible, is inextricably intertwined with the truth. And there are certain ways that we can say what is true in a kind and a gentle and persuasive way, but love can never be without the truth. And that's the problem with empathy, is that it's really unconcerned with what is true.
So for the Christian that wants to maintain biblical fidelity and properly exercise virtues without being manipulated by the culture, how should they be thinking through this?
Yeah, I think it is really easy to be manipulated by people who use Christian sounding language to try to convince you of a particular position. And a lot of people have come to believe that empathy is a fruit of the Spirit. And it's simply not. If we want to make sure that we are in alignment with Scripture, that we are truly loving people, that we are truly compassionate, then we can follow the example of Jesus. He didn't simply say, wow, you feel really hurt and I feel how you feel. He said, no, get up and walk, your sins are forgiven, or go and sin no more. And if we read scripture, the love that we are to model our lives after is not going to be applauded by the world. It's not going to look like the world's love. It is not going to affirm sin. It is not going to affirm delusions. It's not going to support destructive and chaotic policies. It will be in alignment with biblical principles. And I try to give kind of a primer on all of that in my book. But God is really gracious that He gives us so much clarity on all of the issues that we are dealing with today in His Word. So if we're worried about how we're responding, we just have to do our best to live our lives in alignment with what He says.
All right, let's talk about social media. It can be used for the good and can be used for the bad.
Yeah.
When we're thinking about toxic empathy and how toxic messages can be leveraged, especially on social media.
Yeah.
How should the Bible-believing Christian committed to orthodoxy be aware as they're consuming social media? What should they be looking for, listening to, and how can they be safeguarded?
Well, we are all imperfect, myself included, when it comes to that. We can probably all think of times where we wonder if we should have waited longer to respond or if we should have dug deeper into something. I say if anything confirms your prior. So if something seems too good or too bad to be true, before reposting it or responding to it, wait. Dig a little bit deeper. And do not allow social media to dictate your outrage about something. That's something we really saw in 2020 when everyone was posting the black squares, everyone was posting the same thing in support of Black Lives Matter, and people were told, if you don't support this idea that America is institutionally racist, then you yourself are racist. Christians shouldn't be bullied by that. We shouldn't be manipulated by that. We should stand back for a second and say, what is true? What is biblically true, most importantly, but what is factually true? Because if something isn't factually true, we also shouldn't hop on board. It might take some digging, or if you just don't know and you're like, I don't have time to do all that research, you don't have to chime in. You don't have to say anything. No one is owed your participation in their argument. So I'd say that, but it can also be a good platform to change someone's mind and speaking the truth in love. Some people might say all social media is toxic. We shouldn't be a part of it at all, but if I can just tell like a brief story about how my mind was changed a long time ago, actually about abortion. And this was 2017, and I was already adding commentary on social media. Might have even been 2016, and I certainly considered myself pro-life. But I was pro-life except for in certain situations. But I didn't think that those exceptions made me pro-choice. I was pro-life except in rape and incest. I was pro-life except in maybe a case of fetal anomaly. And I remember posting something in that spirit on Facebook, and someone responded. I don't know who they are. They commented under it saying, what is the difference in a baby that's conceived in rape and a baby that's not? And that comment totally changed how I saw the abortion debate. I realized that even as someone who considered myself pro-life, that I was really thinking about the issue in the abstract. I was thinking about what might win elections, or what is the Republican position, what's the conservative position, what's the nuanced position, and not what is the biblically righteous position. And when I started thinking about all of these issues, but especially abortion, through the eyes of the victim, through the perspective of the person that is actually being killed, that made me realize, okay, there really is no situation in which we should intentionally kill any innocent person, regardless of their size or location. And so I just want to say that you may never know it, but you speaking the truth in love on social media may actually change someone's mind. And maybe it won't change their mind in that moment. Maybe you'll never know about it, but God can use your words even on X or Facebook or wherever to really change someone's heart. So don't stop speaking up is what I'd say.
All right, so you brought up abortion. Let's go there. Obviously had a lot to celebrate with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Unfortunately, we get to 2024. Candidates and politicians that were at one time staunchly pro-life all of a sudden said it's not a winnable issue.
Yeah.
As I often thought, we maybe need to rethink our vote when it comes to those candidates. You were bold. You came out, regardless of what candidate you've been behind historically or what party you're registered with. We need to be staunchly pro-life, regardless of whether the polls say it's a winnable issue or not. What did 2024 remind you, and ultimately what should it remind every Christian that is staunchly pro-life about the work that still needs to be done?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in changing hearts and minds and persuading people. I am thankful, so thankful for the unseen, unsung work of those in the pro-life movement, especially at pregnancy centers, because those are the people, even though they'll never be heralded by the media, who are dispelling all of the ugly myths from the pro-abortion side that says that we're just pro-birth, we don't care about women, we don't care about babies, we just want to control women's bodies. It's really the work of pro-lifers in these pregnancy centers that are busting that myth every single day, and they have been so persistent and consistent for so many decades. And so for those people, I want to say, keep doing what you're doing, and God is using your work for His glory and the good of other people. For those of us who are in the space of trying to change hearts and minds, we have to continue to be bold and remember that we are not saved by any politician, that our political affiliation is not salvific. And those of us who are Christian and truly pro-life, we have to see our role in the political sphere as an anchor. Because now we've got this Make America Healthy Again movement, which I'm very thankful for, but with it brought a lot of people who are center left, who are not with us on abortion. And while we are grateful for their positions on a variety of things, now is not our time to moderate. Now is not our time to move closer to them so we can just win elections. It doesn't really matter if we win elections if we're moving further and further away from the truth. So our job is to persuade those people who we already agree with on so many things, but we have to show them this is a Make America Healthy Again issue. This is obviously a biblical issue for us. This is a scientific, moral issue. This is a population issue. There's so many angles that we can really address this from, but our job is to be an anchor and not equivocate, especially when it comes to an issue of life and death.
I love that. Speaking of the election of Trump, we've certainly seen a lot of pushback against the transgender movement in America.
Yeah.
We saw the executive order a few weeks ago, which to us seems like common sense, that we're just keeping women's sports for women, which is a good thing, but also just common sense.
Yeah.
And there's many critics that say this is just affecting a small portion of the population. But why does the pushback against transgenderism, particularly in the area of sports, really have incredible implications that go well beyond sports and well beyond the transgender issue?
Yeah, well, it is forcing people to say that 2 + 2 = 5. And if anyone has read 1984, you know that that is a sure sign of tyranny. When you can force people to accept and then regurgitate something that is materially untrue, you control their mind. I mean, they don't have any autonomy. And so just for the sake of reality, that biology exists, that there is male, there is female, that these things cannot scientifically be, they can't be interchanged, they can't be swapped out. That's just a matter of just standing up against the tyranny of the mind. But of course, we know that this question is answered for us Christians in the very first chapter of the first book of the Bible. It's almost like God knew we were going to be confused about some things, and He was like, I'm not even going to make you read 30 verses before I answer this question, that I made them in my image as male and female. So right there, we get the value of life and the definition of gender in marriage: one man, one woman. And so for Christians, this really shouldn't be difficult. We're standing up for biological reality. This has a profound impact on children who are gender deceived, who are given cross-sex hormones, rendered permanently sterile, whose bodies are being butchered even as minors. This has implications for the girls and the women who are now being forced, sometimes under threat of punishment, to change in front of and be changed in front of males in the locker room and bathroom. It's a matter of fairness and impartiality. And so for Christians, it's a matter of reality. It's a matter of biblical morality. It's a matter of justice. I mean, there is simply no reason every Christian shouldn't be speaking up loudly against this. If even the secular people in America are saying, this is too far, Christians should surely be on the front lines.
I love that you said earlier that we don't take these positions because we're affiliated with a particular political party. We take these positions fighting for the right to live from the moment of conception. We push back against transgenderism because we belong to the King.
Yes.
Because we're Christians.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, we have seen the rise of Christless conservatism.
Yeah.
Why is that so dangerous, not only outside of the church, but why is it so dangerous as we see the rise even inside of the church as well?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people say you can approach abortion, you can approach gender, you can approach all of these issues from a non-Christian perspective. There's so many ways that you can get to them. And while it's true, for the sake of persuasion, you could have an argument about abortion from a non-religious perspective. Only Christianity tells us why. Yes, I can tell you that a baby at the earliest point of conception is scientifically a human being, but only Genesis 1:27 really tells me, and Psalm 139 and Jeremiah 1:5 really tells me why the fact that he or she is a human matters and why we should not kill him or her. Yes, science can tell us that male and female exist, but really Christianity tells me why what we feel on the inside does not trump our physical reality. It is Christianity that tells me that no, our souls and our bodies are intertwined, that our body actually matters, that we're made in the image of God. So Christianity gives the why. And of course, our founders understood this. We can read that in our founding documents, that we are given rights endowed to us by our Creator. That's really the whole premise of conservatism, that those powers should be conserved to the people, preserved for the people, because we are a self-governing society. We have been given rights by a God whose power supersedes that of the government. And if you don't believe that there is a power bigger than the government, then the government is the biggest power, then they do have the right to give and take away, to redefine when life begins, to redefine marriage, to redefine gender. And so it just doesn't work. It ends up falling apart. Pragmatism only works for so long.
Allie, we've seen, or we hear a lot of talk about toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
But a masculinity that is defined by God and His Word is absolutely critical for the family and for the church. Speak to that. Yes,
masculinity is, men really are like one of the most powerful forces on earth, and you can see that really all throughout history, how men and their strength and their ambition and their aggression have created beautiful, wonderful institutions and empires, and also have forged some of the worst violence and injustice that we've ever seen. That's not to let women off the hook at all. We could all go back to the Garden of Eden and see our role in that. But that's just to say that God made men especially powerful, that their drive for leadership and to conquer and to build can be really good, but when motivated by the wrong things can also be uniquely destructive. And that is why masculinity shouldn't be tampered, but has to be harnessed for good. Because any woman can tell you, even the most feminist woman can tell you that they're glad when a big, strong man is around, when they feel like someone is, on their tail following them in a dark alley. Everyone knows the power and the need for masculinity. It's just a matter of harnessing it. When we have very dangerous and destructive examples of masculinity in Andrew Tate, we need to make sure as Christians that we are showing men the alternative to that is not weakness, is not feminine men, but is strong, righteous, loving men who love their wives, who love their kids, and are building good things. So we just need to make sure that we have those examples for young Christian men because they're looking for them.
Awesome. Allie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pastor.
And hopefully we'll have you back.
The City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. Visit us at cityofgodpodcast.com to access all of our previous episodes. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or anywhere you get podcasts. A full video version of this podcast is available on YouTube. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.